Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jonathan. I'm a first year PhD student studying accounting at the University of Waterloo. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing about 6 things I think you should consider before applying and accepting your PhD offer. Doing a PhD is a serious commitment, and there are definitely many things you need to consider before applying and accepting your offer. In this video, I'm going to share some of the things that I was thinking about when I applied to my PhD program, and some of these thoughts actually still stick with me today. Before I jump into the video, if you guys could subscribe to the channel and hit that thumbs up button, that would really help me out. So number 1, you need to think about what you are actually interested in. In Canada, a PhD in accounting typically takes 5 years, and a key requirement to graduate from the program is you have to write a thesis, which is essentially a piece of your own original research in an area you're interested in. Now, it is common to go into a PhD program not knowing what you want to do your thesis in, and that's typically because as an undergraduate or master's student, you may simply not be exposed to a lot of the research side of your topic. But you should have a general idea of what you are interested in, because that is going to be the main driver to motivate yourself to work every single day. You're essentially going to be spending years of your life researching a particular topic, and if you aren't genuinely interested in that topic, a PhD is going to be really difficult for you. For me, I actually did not know what I wanted to do my PhD thesis in, and I still don't know to this day. But when I was applying to the PhD program, I kind of knew what I liked. I enjoyed my financial accounting classes in my undergrad and master's degree. I liked learning about different accounting standards, the objectives of the standards, and why accounting standards changed over time. In fact, during my work experience as an audit manager, I actually had some experience helping my company implement a new accounting standard. So on some kind of level, I was generally interested in a certain area of accounting. And not surprisingly, if you guys have been following the channel, you'll know that I'm actually doing my summer research project right now. And I'm actually doing that project in an area that I'm interested in, which is financial accounting. Also, I noticed that when I read certain papers, there are certain topics that I actually do enjoy reading about. And so it makes the experience of reading those papers more enjoyable. And there are also topics that I don't find as interesting. So if you're doing an undergrad or a graduate degree right now, I really think you should consider what courses you guys are enjoying and why you enjoy those courses. If you genuinely enjoy those courses and would consider digging deeper into the material, then maybe a PhD might be the right decision for you. Now, the second thing you should probably consider is why you want to get a PhD. Now, if you think a PhD will help you get an industry job, you are sadly mistaken. In fact, I would highly recommend that you just stick to working full-time, building your work experience, and getting your professional accounting designation, which in Canada is a CPA. In accounting, I would say a PhD is not a requirement to get a job, and I'll tell you why. In a PhD, you are reading a lot of papers about accounting theory and research methodology. You are working with professors on their research projects, and you'll likely be teaching a first-year class to new university students. However, you are not learning about new accounting standards, you aren't doing anything with journal entries or preparing financial statements, which are probably fundamental skills that you actually do need in an accounting job. People who get a PhD in accounting typically have the goal in mind of becoming a full-time researcher and professor at a university. The dream job for many PhD students is to actually land a faculty position at a university, teaching students and conducting their own research. Now, there are actually people who do a PhD and they go back to industry, but that is actually not that common, and that shouldn't be your primary goal if you are going to be doing a PhD. Another thing to note is that if your goal is to be a university lecturer or instructor, you actually don't need a PhD to do either. I've seen many cases where accounting instructors, session lecturers, and teaching stream professors don't have a PhD, but they have years of work experience and they're really good at public speaking and teaching. So people who do a PhD are primarily trained to be researchers and professors with a strong emphasis on the research part. You're expected to, and you're pretty much being paid by the university on your ability to generate new research and to push the frontiers of your discipline. So if being a researcher is something that you are considering as a full-time job in your future, then maybe a PhD is the right decision for you. But if your goal is to just work in industry, then I strongly don't recommend a PhD. Now, the third thing that you should think about is the huge opportunity costs and risks that are associated with doing a PhD. Now, the opportunity cost is the fact that you're actually not going to be working full-time at an industry job, and you're not earning a full-time salary for 4 to 5 years, depending on how long your PhD program is. Now, in a PhD, you are likely going to be getting a stipend, but that is unfortunately nothing compared to what you could be making in industry. Second, there is actually a very good chance that after you obtain your PhD and you do all that work, you might not have a job lined up for you. There are only so many spots available for new professor jobs, but there are a lot of PhD students graduating every year. It's actually very, very competitive to get a job as a professor, and you're pretty much competing with everybody else in the world who has graduated that year. I actually learned in my first year of my PhD that your ability to get a job starts when you join the PhD program in your first year. On top of just surviving your coursework and completing your thesis, you need to try very, very hard to try to get something published. If you can get something published as a PhD student in a journal, then that would be a huge competitive advantage to your resume. But publishing something is extremely, extremely hard because A, you have to think of a brand new idea. B, this idea has to be something that nobody else in the world has thought of. And C, you have to back it up with data and prove that the data supports your theory. So needless to say, there's actually a huge risk that you need to consider if you want to do a PhD. You may not get a professor job at the end of it. And if you don't, you haven't worked a full-time job in industry for 4 to 5 years. And if you don't have a professor job lined up, you might have to go back to industry for a lower paying job because you had that 5-year gap. So if this opportunity cost and this risk is something that you can stomach, then maybe a PhD is the right decision for you. Number 4 on my list is that you have to think about the financial consequences of doing a PhD. Now, I kind of touched on it on my previous point about how you're not earning a full-time industry salary, but instead you're receiving a stipend from the university. Now, at the University of Waterloo, my stipend as a first-year PhD student in accounting is around $22,000, $24,000 for the full year. Now, with this stipend, I use it to pay my tuition and my living expenses. Now, if I wasn't a PhD student and I was instead working as an audit manager in Toronto, based on my current experience, I could be making around $85,000 to $90,000 a year. So I am definitely taking a huge salary hit as I'm doing this program, and arguably my standard of living is taking a hit as well. Now, the stipend that I get from the university is contingent on a few things. So number 1, I have to do well on my courses. I got to pass everything and maintain at least an 80% average, I believe. Number 2, I need to work as either a research assistant or a teaching assistant for each term, which requires around 10 hours of work each week. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, can you live off of $22,000 a year? And my answer to that is, if you're an individual without anyone depending on you financially, then it is doable. So if I live with roommates in Waterloo and I spend my money carefully, then I'm actually expecting to break even on my stipend and hopefully won't have to dip into my personal savings that I've built over a number of years of working full time. But if you have a partner or kids that is depending on you financially, then I actually think that a PhD stipend might not be enough to support your family unless your family is willing to reduce their standard of living by a considerable amount. Now, I know that when my dad was doing his PhD at the University of Waterloo, his stipend and savings not only supported himself, but he was also supporting my mom, me, and my sister when we were both kids. So needless to say, under my dad, we had to make every dollar stretch during those years. And if that's a financial concern that you don't want to stomach, then maybe a PhD is not the right decision for you. Moving on to number 5, you should kind of have a general idea of what kind of work you would be doing in a PhD program. Now, for this point, I'm going to be using accounting as an example because an undergrad or master's in accounting is actually completely different from a PhD in accounting. So in your undergrad or master's degree in accounting, your goal is to pretty much obtain your CPA designation. And a lot of the courses that you're going to take in your degrees are centered around that designation. For example, in your financial accounting classes, you're going to learn about different accounting standards, how to prepare and recognize journal entries, how to prepare a trial balance and financial statements. And in many cases, you do a lot of accounting case studies where you're given a certain transaction or situation, and your job is to analyze that situation and use your professional judgment to determine what's the best way to recognize those journal entries. Another example is in tax class. You learn about the tax treatment for different types of transactions, and you literally learn how to calculate the amount of taxes you have to pay. Now, that's pretty standard for an undergrad or master's in accounting. But as a PhD student, it's actually completely different. I haven't done any of that stuff in my PhD program, and I'm not expecting to do any of it in my remaining 4 years. I actually spend every day of my PhD program reading papers on accounting research, accounting theory, and research methodology. I'm actually going to use the syllabus of my accounting seminars and just list all the topics that I've read papers about this past year. And this is the first time I've encountered any of these topics in my life. And I've encountered them all in my PhD program. I haven't looked at any of it in my undergrad or master's degree. And I think I finally understand why some people get so confused when I tell them that I'm doing a PhD in accounting. And that's because most people just think accounting is about debits and credits and journal entries, but actually accounting research is like this whole new world of stuff that I just never knew existed. So depending on your discipline, a PhD might be completely different from what you originally expect. Now, if you have no idea what a PhD is like, I actually recommend that you speak to a professor who is involved in the PhD program at your school and just kind of ask them on what it's like being a PhD student, what kind of stuff do you learn, and they can give you a lot of great insight into this unknown world of a PhD. Now, the last thing you should consider after considering everything else first is the actual application to the PhD program. Now, most applications are pretty standard and they're going to ask for the typical things like a personal statement, transcripts, recommendation letters, and a test score from either the GMAT or the GRE. If you are considering a PhD, it is obviously best to start preparing your application as early as possible. For example, the GMAT might be a significant obstacle in your application. I know for myself, it took me a couple years of preparation and taking the test again and again and again and again to finally get a 700 score, which I felt was actually competitive enough for a PhD application. It's also actually really important to start building your relationships with your current professors. So when you ask them for an academic recommendation letter, they actually have good things to say about you. And last but not least, you should think about whether or not you can network with the school that you are interested in. Now, many schools actually do host some sort of information session or open house, and they invite people who are interested in the program to come to the school, speak with professors and the current students. In my experience, it was essentially an information session mixed in with an interview. So for me, I attended the accounting PhD open house at the University of Waterloo. I remember taking the day off and driving down to the university, and I had the chance to meet with a lot of the faculty members, and I sat through the information session and learned a lot more detailed information about the program and the university. Now, there was a portion of the event where a professor actually asked every attendant why they were interested in the PhD program and why they were interested in Waterloo. And each person had to say their answers not only in front of the professor, but in front of everybody else as well. And the professor was actually taking notes on our responses. So you can pretty much see this as an open interview type thing. Another cool part of the open house is that they let us sit in on one of the seminars where a visiting professor was actually presenting his paper to the department. And that was really cool because it gave you a taste of what it was like being an accounting PhD student at the University of Waterloo. And then the last thing we did on that day is that we had some one-on-one time with certain professors in the faculty that focused on a particular type of research. And I pretty much spoke to each of the professors for about 15 to 30 minutes. So overall, I was actually really happy I went to the event because it's a great chance to make a really good first impression. And so when you actually apply to the program and submit your application, you're not just some anonymous person to them. They recognize your name, and essentially they recognize that you went to the information session and you showed interest. And I actually think that I did make a good impression in that open house because I think I was the only one who went to the event that got accepted to the program. I know there are 2 other first-year students that are doing the program with me right now, and I don't remember seeing them at the open house. So I definitely think networking can be a huge competitive advantage to your application. Now, if there is no open house event, then I would strongly recommend that you reach out to the PhD coordinator or the director of the PhD program and just set up a Zoom call with them to get to know the program better. So with that being said, that kind of wraps up my 6 points that I think you should consider before applying and accepting your PhD offer. Even though I was speaking from an accounting PhD perspective, I do think that these considerations can be applied to any PhD program. So hopefully this video was really informative and helped you guys decide whether or not a PhD is the right fit for you. If you enjoy watching university content and PhD content, then this is definitely the channel for you. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.